The allele misconception. How many alleles are there? First things first, what is an allele anyway? To understand an allele, it's important to know its history. Back in 1866, this guy here, Gregor Mendel, published a book called Experiments in Plant Hybridization, where he experimented the inheritance patterns of pea plants. Mendel made some revolutionary discoveries with his peas, one being that alleles are just different versions of the same trait. In sexually reproducing species, you inherit two copies of the same gene, one from mom and one from dad. These copies are called alleles and can be slightly different. The difference in these inherited alleles is that one can be dominant and one can be recessive. The dominant allele is typically represented with a capital letter. It is always expressed even when it is combined with a recessive allele. A recessive allele is typically represented with a lowercase level, and it is only expressed when it is inherited with a recessive allele. Mendel bred thousands and thousands of pea plants and discovered two main types of inheritance patterns, autosomal dominant and autosomal recessive. These patterns became the foundation for modern genetics. This is an example of a dominant recessive inheritance pattern similar to what Mendel would use. Here they bred a homozygous recessive green pea with a heterozygous dominant yellow pea. Green is the recessive allele, while yellow is the dominant allele. They mapped out the possible outcomes of this breeding with a Punnett square. The misconception that there are only two alleles, dominant and recessive, come from the fact that Mendel made these discoveries back in 1866, so it was all the world of genetics knew for a very long time. However, it is much more complicated than that. With more research, the world has discovered many different ways that we can inherit different alleles, including codominance, incomplete dominance, and X-linked inheritance. Codominance is the inheritance pattern where both alleles that are inherited can be expressed at the same time. Back in 1944, a researcher named John Laudit explains how the ABO system is an example of that, where A and B can combine to codominate over O. Incomplete dominance is the inheritance pattern where a combination of alleles can determine the severity of a trait. For example, the bitter taste of PTC is determined by the combination of alleles, where a heterozygous individual can taste the bitter PTC weaker than a homozygous dominant individual. Finally, X-linked inheritance is the inheritance pattern that follows a mutation on the X chromosome. A mother with two X's can pass down a mutated X to her daughter or her son. However, a father with an X and a Y can only pass down his X to his daughter, not his son. We hope this video disproves the misconception that there are only two types of alleles. Thank you for learning the different types of alleles with us and the different inheritance patterns.